My name is Kara, and this happened in December of 2008. I was 11 years old then. I'm old enough now to understand how memory can warp things, how fear can stretch moments, how your brain fills in gaps. I've tried to convince myself that's what happened, but there are details from that night that feel too sharp to be imagined. The power went out just after dinner. One second, the TV was murmuring in the background. The next, it was like the house had been unplugged from the world. My mom went straight into calm mode. She lit candles from the cabinet we only opened during outages and talked through it like a plan. One for the kitchen, one for the hallway, one for the living room. My dad headed to the basement to check the breaker, even though we already knew the whole neighborhood was dark. That's what he always did, try to fix something, even when it wasn't fixable. Outside, the storm was aggressive. Snow flew sideways, hitting the windows in thick clumps before scraping off again. The wind didn't howl so much as shove, like it was testing the house again and again. My mom dragged couch cushions to the floor and called it camping. She made hot chocolate on the gas stove. I built a little blanket fort under the coffee table. For a while, it felt like an adventure. That's how blackouts are for kids. Fun at first, then you start listening. The house creaked in places I'd never noticed. Every sound felt louder without the usual background noise. Lightning cracked somewhere far off. Winter lightning is different. It doesn't linger. It snaps the world into view for a split second, then drops it back into darkness.
Grainger knows that if you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything.
The first flash just showed snow. The yard looked erased, the fence barely visible. The second flash showed a person. He was standing in our yard, near the middle, where my dad usually piled snow after shoveling. Just a dark shape against all that white. My first thought was childish logic. It's probably someone we know, maybe a neighbor checking on us. That thought lasted half a second. Nobody was outside in weather like that. You couldn't see 2 houses down. The weather radio kept repeating the same warning in a flat, mechanical voice. I must have made a sound because my dad came over fast. "What are you doing?" he asked. "There's someone outside," I said. He stared out into the storm. Without the lightning, there was nothing to see. "There's nobody there," my mom said gently, stepping closer. Then the next flash came. The man was closer. Not a little closer, clearly closer. Now near the fence line, angled toward the house. Still standing the same way, not bracing against the wind, not moving at all. I watched my dad's shoulders tighten. He didn't say anything. He just stepped away from the window. "No more looking," my mom said quickly. She closed the curtain even though it didn't block the light from the lightning. It felt like pulling a blanket up against fear. But I kept peeking. I was 11. Curiosity always beat obedience by just enough. The next flash came sooner. The man was closer again. Now he was near the edge of the yard where snow drifted up against the house. His posture hadn't changed. It was like he wasn't moving between flashes, like each burst of light was just updating his position. That was the detail that stuck with me. People move when they're outside in a storm. They lean, stumble, fight the wind. This man looked like he was standing in a quiet room. My dad checked the locks. Deadbolt. Chain. He jiggled the chain until it sat right. We moved into the hallway, away from the windows. My mom kept her voice light, but her hands stayed on my shoulder. My dad sat upright in a chair, flashlight and hammer in his hands. Like that combination meant something. The lightning kept coming. With the next flash, he was right against the house, standing below the living room window, close enough to touch it. That flash lasted just long enough for me to register more detail. The bulk of his shoulders, the dark shape of a hood or hat, the suggestion of boots. Then the darkness snapped back. A second later, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A soft scrape along the side of the house. It could have been snow sliding. It could have been anything. But it sounded like movement near the foundation. Nobody spoke. My mom's hand tightened on my shoulder. My dad stood up and stepped toward the living room, slow and careful, like sudden movement might invite something worse. Another flash lit the hallway. I didn't look this time. I stared at the curtain like it was the only thing holding the house together. Nothing happened after that. No knock, no broken glass, just wind and snow and the sound of our breathing. Eventually, the storm eased. The lightning stopped first. My brother fell asleep, my mom dozed, my dad stayed awake, sitting straight-backed until morning. When daylight came, the world looked calm again. The snow lay smooth and clean, like the night had been erased. My dad went outside alone first. He walked the yard slowly, scanning. There was no man, no damage, no footprints leading away. Then he pointed. Deep boot prints pressed into the snow right up against the house beneath the living room window. Close enough that someone standing there could have leaned into the glass. My parents didn't talk about it much after that. They blamed the storm. They blamed tricks of light. But my dad shoveled that spot first before the sun could soften the snow. I grew up and stopped being scared of storms, but I never stopped being scared of someone standing still.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also motivating Manning. When I say insurance, you say financial services. Insurance.
I'm a mechanic. I don't say that to sound tough. It just means I'm wired to trust what I can see, measure, and fix. Winters up here in Presque Isle, Maine are the same way. You don't romanticize them. You prepare. That storm had been coming for days. Heavy snow, high wind, the kind of forecast that clears roads and keeps people inside. I topped off the generator, stacked firewood by the door, charged my phone and backup battery, and left the shovel leaning against the wall like I always do. I lived alone a few minutes outside town, quiet even on good nights. When the storm rolled in, the quiet changed. Snow swallowed sound. Wind pressed against the house like it wanted something. I made coffee even though it was late, watched half a movie without following it, checked the clock, and thought I should sleep before the power decided otherwise. That's when I heard the voice. At first, I thought it was the TV. Then I remembered the TV was just static. Cable had gone out hours earlier. The sound came again. Please, help me. It was a kid's voice. I stood up slowly. Your brain does this thing where it tries to protect you from jumping to conclusions. It tells you there's a reasonable explanation that you'll feel stupid in a second. But it was past midnight. The storm was heavy. Roads were dead. No kid should have been anywhere near my porch. I moved toward the front window and leaned just enough to see out. The porch light cast a weak yellow glow through blowing snow. I didn't see a child. I saw footprints. They led straight from the yard to the porch steps. Deep impressions in fresh snow. Wide. Heavy. Adult boot prints. Long stride. Thick tread. No small steps mixed in. No dragging marks. Nothing that matched a child struggling through snow. The voice came again. Help me. It sounded closer. I went to the door but didn't touch the lock. Who's there? I called. There was a pause. Long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it. Then the voice answered, same tone as before. I'm cold. Let me in. The words felt wrong. Not because a kid wouldn't say them, but because it sounded like someone repeating a line they'd learned. I should have called 911 immediately. I know that now, but I hesitated, caught between instinct and guilt. If it really was a kid, ignoring it felt wrong. If it wasn't, opening the door felt worse. I grabbed my phone and aimed the camera through the peephole. Snow smeared the lens. Glare swallowed detail. Nothing. No shape. No movement. just snow and the porch light buzzing faintly. But the footprints were still there. Solid. Undeniable. The voice came again, this time from the side of the porch, near the window. Please, help me. I moved to the window and looked out. Same prints. No new tracks leading around the house. No indication anything had moved. Snow doesn't miss footsteps. Snow keeps records. Who's out there? I said again, louder. I'm cold, the voice replied. Same calm delivery. I stepped back and called 911. The dispatcher sounded tired, strained. I gave my address and explained child's voice, adult footprints. She told me response time would be delayed due to the storm. Told me not to open the door. I'm not, I said. The moment I hung up, the voice returned. Help me. I stayed quiet. It spoke again. Let me in. Now it sounded closer to the door. I stood with my back to the wall, listening. The house creaked. Wind rattled the siding. Then the voice came from the living room side of the house. I'm cold. I moved to that window. Looked out. Nothing. The yard was smooth except for the original boot prints leading to the porch. That's when something clicked in my head. If the voice was moving, the snow should show it. It didn't. I stayed up the rest of the night. Lights low, TV off, phone in my hand. The voice came and went, always the same phrases. Sometimes near the door, sometimes near a window. At one point I whispered, "What do you want?" Nothing answered. Then, minutes later, "Help me." Sometime before dawn, it stopped completely. Just gone. The silence afterward felt heavier than the storm. Morning came gray and still. Snow piled high against the door. I opened the curtain slowly. The footprints were gone, buried by the fresh snow. But if I close my eyes, I can see them in my mind. Large adult tracks paced back and forth like someone had waited. No child's prints. No sign of someone being carried. No clear trail away. Wind had softened the edges just enough to erase direction. That's what stayed with me. Not the voice. Not even the idea of someone standing out there all night. It was the design of it. A child's voice is a key. You hear it, and the decent part of you reaches for the lock. I don't know what was outside my house that night. I just know it wanted a door opened, and it didn't care whose voice it used. After that winter, I installed a camera on the porch, upgraded the lights, made sure my phone never dropped below half battery. And on nights when snow buries the road and sound disappears, I still listen.
When a child is in the hospital, visitors come to say hello. And when visiting hours are over, they leave. But family does whatever it takes to stay. At Ronald McDonald House, we believe families shouldn't have to fight alone. So we make sure they have everything they need with a community of support, warm.
My name is Kara, and this happened in January of 2022. That night, the storm had started earlier in the evening and never let up. Snow came down in thick, steady sheets, and the wind kept pushing it sideways, rattling the siding and making the windows vibrate. It wasn't the worst blizzard Fargo had ever seen, but it was the kind that convinced you to stay inside without question. I was home alone, laptop open on the kitchen counter, finishing notes from work. The TV was on low in the living room. Background noise more than entertainment. My neighborhood is tight and quiet. Houses close together, sidewalks running right past the front windows. From my couch, I can see the street without even leaning forward. Around 10:30 p.m., I stood up to refill my water and looked out the window the way you do without thinking. But then I saw Brent. He lived a few houses down. Quiet guy. Polite. We'd exchanged waves. Nothing more. The kind of neighbor you forget about the moment you close your door. He was walking past my house in the storm like it was a mild evening. No coat, no hat, no gloves, just a thin gray sweatshirt and jeans. At first, I assumed he'd stepped out to grab something from his car. People do dumb things in winter. But as he came closer, something felt off. just wrong in a quiet way. He wasn't hunched against the cold. His hands weren't shoved in his pockets. He wasn't moving quickly. He walked with an easy, even pace, like the weather wasn't touching him at all. Then, as he reached my front window, he turned his head. He looked straight into my living room. I took a step back without meaning to. He didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge me, just kept walking until he disappeared into the snow and darkness near the corner street light. I stood there longer than I needed to, waiting for the moment where it made sense. It didn't. I checked the time, 10:38 p.m. I went back to my laptop and tried to focus, but the image kept replaying. Mostly the way his posture hadn't changed. Anyone else would have been bracing against the wind. He'd moved like it was 60 degrees out. Around 11:40, I got up again. Bathroom, water. Another unconscious look at the window. He was there again. Same clothes, still no coat. This time, he was under the streetlight as he approached. Snow clung to his shoulders and hair, but he didn't react to it. When he reached my yard, he looked in again. It felt like checking. I stepped back into the darker part of the room. He passed without stopping, arms loose at his sides. I checked the time again, 11:41 p.m. Now it was a pattern. I locked the front door even though it was already locked. Checked the back door. Stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the wind and trying to talk myself down. People walk at night. Insomnia. Stress. Maybe he was pacing. Maybe he'd had a fight. None of those explanations felt solid, but they were better than the alternative. At 12:52, he passed again. This time, I didn't move away from the window. I stood still and watched him approach. When he got close, he slowed slightly, just enough to notice. Then he turned his head farther than before, moving it like he was trying to see deeper into the room. Not looking for me, confirming where I was. I turned the TV off. The silence felt safer than noise. At 1:58, he came again. I shut off the lamp in the living room, leaving the room mostly dark, and watched from the hallway. If the light was what he was checking for, maybe this would stop it. It didn't. At 2:59, he passed again. I stood there with my phone in my hand, debating who I could call without sounding ridiculous. My neighbor keeps walking past my house isn't an emergency. It's barely a sentence anyone takes seriously. The last time was 3:11 a.m. I know that because I checked my phone as soon as I saw him under the streetlight. This time, he was closer to my house. Not fully in the yard, but close enough that it felt intentional. He slowed as he reached my window. Then he stopped. He turned his head completely toward the glass, facing the exact spot where I stood in the dark. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I could see his face angled with purpose. He didn't squint, didn't shift like someone trying to see into darkness. He held still, like he already knew. I pressed my hand over my mouth, not trusting myself to stay quiet. After a few seconds, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm like every other time. That should have been relief. It wasn't, because he didn't leave like someone who gave up. He left like someone who finished a round. I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with my phone in my hand until the sky lightened and the storm settled into a dull, gray aftermath. By morning, Brent's car was in his driveway. His porch light was off, like nothing had happened. That afternoon, I walked over and knocked on his door, daylight giving me more courage than I deserved. A woman answered. His girlfriend, I assumed. "Hey," I said, forcing casual. "I just wanted to check. Was Brent okay last night? I saw him walking outside during the storm." She frowned. Brent was home all night. I waited for the correction. The laugh. Anything. "He didn't go out," she said. "We watched a movie and went to bed." I nodded like that settled it and walked back to my house. Later, I checked the snow near the sidewalk. Most of it had been blown over, but a few prints remained near the edge of my yard. What bothered me was that I couldn't trace them back to his front door. There was no clean path from his porch to the sidewalk. No neat set of tracks explaining where he came from. Just prints that appeared near my house and faded into nothing. It wasn't that he walked past my home. It was that he did it like a job, like clockwork. And now, whenever storms roll in and the neighborhood goes quiet, I find myself checking the time without meaning to. It was January of 2016. At the time, I was the county road supervisor. If a plow went missing, if a driver stopped answering the radio, if a route didn't get cleared the way it was supposed to, my phone rang. I built the schedules. I knew every road, every driver, every truck. After enough winters, you don't just recognize plows by sight, you recognize them by sound. I also lived far enough out that nobody ever passed my place unless they had a reason. Long gravel driveway, a shed behind the house, no close neighbors, the kind of quiet where you can hear weather coming. That night, the storm wasn't dramatic on paper. No blizzard warnings, just steady snow and wind. The kind that stacks up quietly and blinds you in bursts. I'd stayed late at the office watching the tracker system and radio traffic, making sure the main routes were being hit in order. Everything looked clean. I got home after midnight, kicked off my boots, and sat down with my laptop out of habit. The house creaked the way it always did when the wind pushed against it. Nothing felt off. Then I heard it. Distant at first. A deep rumble, an engine working under load. I stood up and went to the front window. A snowplow passed in front of my house. Except it had no headlights, no beams cutting through the snow, no amber strobes. Just a dark shape moving through darker weather, the plow blade barely visible against the road, and the engine sound was familiar, unmistakable. I watched it pass my driveway and disappear into the storm. My first thought was that someone was being reckless. Running a plow without lights isn't just stupid, it's deadly. My second thought followed immediately. Why was anyone plowing this road? This stretch wasn't assigned that night. It didn't get touched unless the storm was severe. And even then, only after the main routes were cleared. I knew that for a fact. I'd written the schedule myself. I walked back to the table and pulled up the county tracker. Every unit showed exactly where it was supposed to be. I refreshed the screen. Same result. Maybe a contractor, I told myself. A rancher with a retired rig. Wyoming's full of guys who like moving snow more than sleeping. But the engine I'd heard didn't sound like a hobby. I sat there watching the screen, expecting to see the plow swing back around. It didn't. About 45 minutes later, I heard it again. Same engine, same tone. I went back to the window. The plow passed again. Still no headlights. This time it moved slower, like the blade was lower. The road was already filling back in from drifting snow, but I could still see the darker scrape where the blade had passed. For a moment, it looked like the cab angled slightly toward my house, as if the driver had turned to look up at the windows. I can't swear to that part. It could have been wind, could have been my brain trying to assign meaning. But I didn't like it. I called the dispatcher on duty. "Tell me you didn't send anyone down my road," I said. "No," he said immediately. "Nobody's assigned out there. I've got a plow passing my place with the lights off." He checked the system while I waited. "All units are accounted for," he said. "Tracker's clean." "A contractor doesn't run dark," I said, "and nobody does multiple passes on a dead road for free." He radioed the drivers anyway. One by one, they answered from where they were supposed to be. Nobody reported being near my road. Nobody reported seeing another unit. When I hung up, I stayed by the window. The storm kept working. Snow skittered across the road in sheets. Everything looked erased, like the land was trying to wipe itself clean. I went to bed after 2, but I didn't sleep right. Every noise pulled me back up. Around 3:30, I heard it again. This time, I didn't go to the front window. I went to the side of the house, the window that faced my shed. The shed sat back from the road, offset just enough that you couldn't see it unless you knew where to look. Inside were tools, salt, chains, and a snowblower that only cooperated when it felt like it. The plow came into view, crawling down the road in that same dark silhouette. No lights. It passed my driveway entrance like before, but instead of continuing straight, it slowed even more and drifted just far enough that the cab lined up with the path behind my shed. Then it moved out of sight. The engine sound didn't fade like it should have if it kept going down the road. It dropped, muffled, like something solid had come between it and me. I stood there listening. The engine idled briefly, then it stopped. Just wind. I didn't go outside. Anyone who says they would hasn't done the math. Low visibility, slick ground, no backup, and whatever was out there had already decided to move without lights. I stayed inside until morning. When daylight came, the storm had eased. I pulled on layers and walked down to the road. The plow tracks were obvious. Wide blade scrape, deep tire treads. No mistaking them. I followed them. They passed my driveway like before. Then, near the spot where my shed sat back from the road, they angled off. Not into my driveway. Off-road. Toward the space behind the shed. I followed. The rest of the snow around the tracks was untouched. Which made them feel wrong, like a scar across something smooth. Behind the shed, the tracks stopped, turned around, and returned along the same tracks. It was like someone saying, "Look what I could do with your shed if I wanted." I walked the area looking for anything. Footprints, another sign. There was nothing. I reported it because that's what I do. Filed notes, made calls, told my boss. Nobody laughed, but nobody rushed either. Storm nights scramble logs, GPS pings drop, data goes missing. You can explain missing data, you can't explain where a plow went. The next few nights, every engine sound pulled me to a window. I checked the tracker system more than I needed to, like staring at it could prove the world was behaving. Eventually, new snow covered the tracks. The shed looked normal again. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because I still don't believe that plow got lost. I think it found exactly what it came for. And whatever it was, it didn't need headlights to see it. I was 29 and doing delivery work full time. Long routes, late hours, whatever kept the bills paid. Winter runs were normal back then. Storms didn't stop orders. People still needed groceries, prescriptions, and supplies, and someone had to bring them. That night, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being careful. The storm had been building all afternoon. By the time I was on the last leg of my route, the snow was coming down sideways, thick enough that my headlights felt more decorative than useful. The radio kept repeating warnings about low visibility and closed roads. I slowed down, leaned forward in my seat, scanned constantly for movement. Snowstorms have a rhythm. Once you've driven through enough of them, you can feel when something breaks that rhythm. That's why I noticed the car immediately. A sedan sat dead center in the road ahead of me. At first, my brain tried to make it normal. Maybe someone slid and stopped. Maybe they pulled over and got stuck. But as I got closer, I saw the driver's door was wide open. Open like someone stepped out and didn't bother finishing the motion. No hazard lights. No interior light. No movement. I eased my truck to a stop well back from it. I didn't want to pull up too close and risk getting stuck if I had to turn around. Snow was already piling against my tires. I rolled the window down and called out, "Hey, you all right?" Nothing came back except wind. I put my hazards on and stepped out into the storm. The cold bit through my jacket immediately, and the snow stung my face like tiny needles. My boots sank into the slush near the edge of the road. The car looked newer than I expected. Clean. Not something you'd expect to see abandoned like this, especially out here. I walked closer, eyes flicking between the open door and the tree line. Inside, the car was dark. No keys, no phone, no bag. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than I'd keep mine. I touched the hood with the back of my glove. Warm. Not, it's been here all night, warm. Warm like it had been shut off recently. That's when my sense of unease stopped being abstract. If the engine was warm, the driver hadn't left long ago. So, where were they? I looked down at the snow near the open door. Footprints. They started right at the driver's side, clean and deep, not messy or confused. They led straight off the road and into the woods, into the trees. I followed the tracks with my eyes, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were looking for help. Maybe they thought the road led somewhere else. But the footprints didn't look hesitant. They looked purposeful. I called out again, louder. Hello? You need help? Nothing. I took a few cautious steps toward the tree line, not committing, just trying to see past the first row of branches. The woods were black and crowded, snow blowing through the gaps like smoke. The wind made everything sound alive. I reminded myself I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't search and rescue. I was just a delivery driver. Still, the thought kept pushing in. What if someone's hurt? That argument almost worked, until I saw something else. A second set of footprints. They weren't near the car. They were near the edge of the woods. They didn't connect to the first set. They weren't layered or scattered. They were just there, pressed into the snow as if someone had stepped out and stopped, facing the road, facing me. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. But the way those prints were positioned made my skin tighten, like someone had come out to see who was there, then decided not to move any closer. I felt the urge to look behind me immediately, the kind that doesn't come from logic. That instinct made the decision for me. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees without turning fully away. I got back into my truck and locked the doors hard. I sat there for a second with the heater blasting, hands tight on the wheel, trying to talk myself down. Trying to decide if I was about to sound ridiculous calling this in. Then I looked back at the sedan. The door was still open, swaying slightly. Warm engine. Footprints into the woods. Footprints watching the road. I called it in, first to my dispatcher, then to 911. Explaining the location felt harder than it should have. Like the storm distorted words the same way it distorted sight. The operator told me units would check when they could, but conditions were bad. She told me to stay in my vehicle and not go into the woods. I didn't argue. After a few minutes, I made the call to turn around. It took some careful maneuvering in the snow, but I managed without sliding off the road. I kind of expected someone to step out of the trees at the last second, forcing me to choose. No one did. I drove away with my hazards on, checking my mirrors like the woods might follow the road. Later, I found out authorities located the sedan after the storm eased, but they didn't find the driver that night. I never heard anything else. No explanation, no closure. What I still think about is how intentional the whole scene felt. The placement, the open door, the warm engine, the way the footprints didn't look lost. It felt like the road had been set up to ask a question I wasn't meant to answer. Snowstorms don't just hide things. They erase timelines, they smooth over choices, they delete endings. And sometimes all you're left with is the feeling that whatever happened was close, too close, and you arrived just late enough to never understand what you almost stepped into. If you also notice that the scariest moments weren't loud, they were quiet, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and tell me which moment stuck with you the most. And if you think Christmas is all warmth and comfort, this next one will ruin that. Click now to watch 4 disturbing Christmas horror stories, because
the story you're about to hear gave me chills. Have you ever wondered why humans seem overly cautious about the remains of other humans? Why we not only bury the dead, but avoid walking over their graves, let alone their remains? This story sent to me by M. Brosnan is titled The Bone Field, and it might explain this universal custom of honoring our dead, because every action has a reaction, whether you're alive or dead. I'm 64 years old now, lived on the same piece of Oklahoma dirt my whole life, and I expect I'll die on it too. That's not a complaint. I've had a good run, raised 3 kids who turned out better than I probably deserved, stayed married to the same beautiful woman for 41 years, and managed to keep the farm going through droughts and floods and everything in between. Most men would call that a blessed life, and I'd agree with them. But there are things that happened here. Things my immediate family kept just between us. And these days we don't talk about it much anymore. My wife, Carol, gets this look in her eye whenever the subject gets close to surfacing. A sort of distant, haunted look. And I notice steer the conversation elsewhere quick. Some memories don't get softer with time. Some of them stay sharp as the day they cut you. I'm only typing this down now because I'm old enough to know that memories fade, whether we want them to or not. And this one, well, it needs to be remembered. Not because I want to relive it. God knows I don't. But because it happened. It was real. And I think there's something wrong about carrying it to my grave without ever setting it down in words. This would have been the summer of 1994. I was in my mid-30s. The years blur together when you're working as hard as I was back then. Carol had been diagnosed with lupus about 3 years prior, and that summer was one of her bad stretches. Some weeks she'd be up and around, almost her normal self, helping with meals and keeping an eye on the kids. Other weeks the disease would flare up something awful, and she'd be bedridden for days at a time. It made her joints swell up. She'd be exhausted right down to her bones, running fevers that would spike out of nowhere. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. I was working the fields from sunup to sundown, then coming home to cook dinner, helping the kids with their schoolwork, and making sure Carol had her medications. Then I'd have to check on the livestock. I'd fall into bed around 11 or 12 most nights, and be back up at 5 to start all over again. But here's the thing. I wasn't unhappy. Not for a single moment. I had a wife I loved, 3 kids who meant the world to me, and land that had been in my family for 3 generations. Every tired muscle, every sleepless night, and every moment of worry about Carol's health. It was all worth it. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, which is something you should know before I tell you what happened, because otherwise you might think this story broke me somehow. It didn't. It scared me worse than anything in my life, but it didn't break me. My 2 older boys, Kenneth and Leonard, we called him Lenny, they were 14 and 13 that summer, respectively. Good kids, the 2 of them. Kenneth was the serious one and always had been. He took after his mom in that way, usually thoughtful and quiet. He'd rather read a book than roughhouse with friends. But Lenny was different. Lenny had an energy about him, a brightness to him. He was a laugher, and he loved to get a rise out of his older brother, which was awfully easy. I think Lenny knew which buttons to press. The 2 of them helped me with farm work when they weren't in school, and they took turns looking after their little sister Beverly, who was 7 at the time. Beverly was a sweet kid, quiet like her mother too, but with more of a stubborn streak that I recognized from my own father. She liked to follow her brothers around the property, collecting rocks and feathers and whatever else caught her eye. She had a whole collection of treasures in a shoebox under her bed. Bits of quartz, an old railroad spike, a bird skull she found near the barn, and kid stuff. Pretty normal stuff. That's what life was like before that summer. We had a normal, happy family. We had our struggles, of course, like Carol's illness, of course, and the financial pressures of keeping a farm afloat. But we were solid. We loved one another, and we took care of each other. But then I found the bones. There was this acre of land on the northeast corner of our property that I'd been meaning to clear for years. It was overgrown with wild prairie grass and dotted with these stubborn little blackjack oak trees, which had taken root God knows how long ago. My grandfather had used it as a dumping ground of sorts, for old equipment and things, like rusted plows and broken fence posts. There was even a skeleton of a Model T out there, which had been sitting there since before I was born. I'd always meant to clear it out and get it ready for planting, but there was always something more pressing to deal with. That summer, I needed the space. We'd had a wet spring, which was good for the soil, and I figured if I could get that acre cleared and planted by fall, I'd have a solid crop of winter wheat to see us through the next year. Every square foot mattered when you were operating on margins as thin as ours. Not that a single acre would get us through a full year, but you get what I mean. We had to make everything count. So I started clearing it. That was hot, miserable work. Mid-July with temperatures pushing 100 degrees, wind blowing so hard some days that the dust would get in your eyes and your nose and your mouth until you felt like you were breathing through sand. I'd head out there after my morning chores and work till noon. Then I'd come back to check on Carol and the kids, then head out again until supper. It took me about 2 weeks to clear most of the brush and haul away the old equipment. It was on the second to last day that I hit something with my tractor. Now, when you're clearing land that's been neglected for decades, you expect to hit things. Usually rocks or roots or maybe some old fence wire, but it's all part of the job. This felt different. There was a crunch and a grinding sound. Then something caught in the rotary cutter and made the whole tractor shudder before it broke free. I shut the engine off and climbed down to take a look. At first, I thought it was an old branch. The sun was right overhead, and I was squinting against the glare, and all I could make out was something pale and splintered lying in the torn-up earth. I got down on one knee and brushed away some of that dirt. And then I realized what I was looking at. They were bones. In fact, they looked like human bones. I was pretty sure, at least. There were 4 or 5 pieces, some of them broken by the rotary cutter, arranged in a way that made me think they'd once been connected. It looked like an arm, maybe. The longest piece was about a foot long and had a joint at one end that looked like it might have been an elbow. The smaller pieces looked like hand bones, though I wasn't certain. They were old. I could tell that much just by looking at them. They had a yellowed, dried-out look that bones tend to get after they've been in the ground for a long time. It had to be decades at least, maybe much longer. I sat there in the dirt for a good few minutes, staring at these bones. I remember the wind picking up then, blowing dust across my face, and I remember thinking that I should probably feel more alarmed than I did. But mostly I just felt confused. How long had these bones been on our property? Who did they even belong to? Had my grandfather known about them? Had his father? Eventually, I got up and walked back to the house to call the sheriff's department. The woman who answered the phone was polite, but not particularly worried. I described what I'd found, and she asked a few questions. These questions were, how old did the bones look? How deep were they buried? Had I noticed anything else unusual in the area? I answered as best I could, and then she put me on hold for a few minutes. When she came back on the line, she told me that a deputy would come out to take a look, but it might be a day or two before anyone was available. In the meantime, she said I should just put the bones aside somewhere safe and try to remember exactly where I'd found them. "You're not worried about this?" I asked. "Sir, we get calls like this more often than you'd think," she explained. "Old farmland and old homesteads. There's all kinds of things buried out there. Most of the time, the bones turn out to be 100 years old or more. Likely Native American remains or pioneer graves. That sort of thing. Unless you've got some reason to believe otherwise, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. I thanked her and hung up, still feeling unsettled. I went back out to the field, gathered up the bone fragments as carefully as I could, and I put them in an old coffee can. Then I sat the can on a shelf in the barn and went back to work. I finished up my day by late afternoon. By then the heat had broken a little, and there was a nice breeze coming in from the west. I drove the tractor back to the barn and washed up at the spigot. Then I headed inside to check on Carol. Carol was awake when I came in, propped up against the pillows with a book in her lap. She looked tired. She always looked tired during her flare-ups, but she smiled when she saw me. "You smell like a goat," she said. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's exactly what I was going for. I'm just saying, if you're trying to attract a mate, you might want to reconsider your approach." I sat down on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Her fingers were swollen. The joints were fiercely red, but she didn't pull away. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Oh, you know, like I've been hit by a truck, dragged behind it for a few miles, then left in a ditch to contemplate my life choices." She squeezed my hand. "But I'm fine. Oh, look at this. Beverly made me a card." She nodded toward the nightstand, where a piece of construction paper had been folded in half and decorated with crayon flowers. Inside, in Beverly's careful handwriting, it said, "Get well soon, Mom. I love you more than rocks." "More than rocks," I said. "That's high praise coming from her." "I know, right? I'm very honored." Carol shifted against the pillows, wincing a little. "How's the clearing going?" "I'll be finished tomorrow." "Good. I was starting to worry you'd get heat stroke out there." "Truth be told, I almost did, but, I found something interesting." I told her about the bones. She listened closely. "That's strange," she said when I was done. "Have you told the boys?" "Not yet. I didn't want to make a big deal about it." "Probably smart. You know how little Lenny is. He'd be out there digging up the whole field looking for more." I smiled at that. It was true. Lenny had inherited his sister's fascination with treasures not long ago, but his taste ran more toward the macabre. He was always bringing home dead insects or snake skins. One time he even brought home an owl pellet. If he knew about these human bones, they would be right up his alley. "Yeah, the sheriff's department didn't seem too worried about it," I said. "They figure they're old. Pioneer era, maybe earlier." Carol nodded. "Makes sense. This land's been here a lot longer than we have." She was quiet for a moment, and her eyes drifted toward the window. The curtains were open, and I could see the sun getting low over the fields. It was nothing but gold and orange out there now. "Still," she said, "it's sad, isn't it? Someone was buried out there, and nobody remembers who they were. Nobody even knew they were there until now." I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd been so focused on the practical questions. Who to call, what to do with human bones, how to get back to work. I hadn't really considered the person the bones belonged to. Someone had lived and died and been laid to rest in that field. And now, decades or maybe centuries later, I'd churned them up with a tractor blade. "Yeah," I said. "I guess it is." We sat together for a while, quiet yet comfortable. Eventually, Carol's eyes started to droop, and I told her to get some rest. I went downstairs to start dinner, and by the time the boys came in from the barn, and Beverly came running in from wherever she'd been exploring, the whole thing had mostly slipped my mind. We ate together, the four of us, crowded around the kitchen table, the way we always did. Kenneth talked about a book he was reading, something about the Civil War, and Lenny complained about having to muck out the horse stalls. Beverly showed me a piece of mica she'd found near the creek, holding it up to the light so I could see the way it sparkled. It was a really good evening, a normal evening. By 10 o'clock, everyone was in bed. Carol had fallen asleep hours earlier, and I'd carried Beverly up to her room after she dozed off on the couch. The boys had gone up on their own, Kenneth with his book and Lenny with his Walkman. I stayed up a while longer, which was also normal for me. I never was good at falling asleep quick. Too many thoughts rattling around in my head. Too many things I should have done differently or still needed to do. I sat in my chair in the living room, listening to the house settle around me, and eventually I felt my eyes getting heavy. I think I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when the screaming started. It was a sound I'd never heard before. Not from an animal, not from a person, not from anything. It was high and raw and absolutely terrified, and it was coming from upstairs. I was on my feet before I was fully awake, my hand reaching for my shotgun I kept propped beside the chair. I don't remember running up the stairs, but I do clearly remember chasing after that awful, endless scream. It was coming from Lenny's room. I threw open the door, ready to confront whatever was inside. But there was just Lenny. He was sitting bolt upright in his bed, his eyes squeezed shut, his mouth open, and he was screaming. But that scream hadn't sounded like him. Maybe I just had never heard him scream like that. "Lenny," I grabbed his shoulder and shook him hard. "Lenny, wake up." He didn't open his eyes, but he did keep screaming, his hands clutching the blankets. His whole body was shaking. "Lenny, it's your dad. You're having a nightmare. Wake up." Then, suddenly, he stopped. His mouth closed, and his body went stiff. In a voice I barely recognized, he said, "I'm not asleep." I felt something cold run down my spine. "What?" "I'm not asleep, Dad." His eyes were still squeezed shut, so tight his whole face was scrunched up with effort. "I saw something in my room. It was standing right there, right next to my bed, and I can't look at it again. I can't." "Lenny, there's nothing in here. It's just me, your dad. Look at me." "No." He rapidly shook his head. No, it was a man, Dad, but his face was wrong. It was all bones, but the bones were wrong. They were flat, like they'd been sanded down smooth, like someone had taken a grinder to his face. I didn't see any eyes or nose or mouth, just smooth, flat bone." I stared at him. My son, my 13-year-old son, shaking in his bed, describing something impossible. "Lenny, it was a nightmare," I told him. "Just a nightmare. There's nothing else here with us, Lenny. I promise." He didn't reply to that. He kept his eyes closed, but there were tears leaking out from under his eyelids. I didn't know what else to do. So I set the shotgun down, and I climbed into bed next to him, and I put my arm around his shoulders. He was still shaking. "Hush, I'm right here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere. Just try to go back to sleep, okay? I'll keep an eye out." It took a long time, but his breathing gradually slowed, and eventually his body relaxed against mine. I could feel his heart beating, still too fast, but slowing down, calming. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, telling myself that it had been just a nightmare, a vivid, terrible nightmare, but nothing more. Kids have nightmares all the time. It didn't mean anything. But I couldn't sleep. Something was keeping me awake, some instinct I couldn't name. I lay there listening to Lenny breathe, listening to the wind outside, listening to the old house creak and settle around us. And then I heard it. It was faint at first, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. A sound coming from the corner of the room, near the closet. A soft and rhythmic sound. Breathing. Something was breathing in the corner of my son's room. I didn't move. I couldn't. I lay there, my heart pounding in my chest, and my arms still wrapped around my son, listening to that sound. Slow and steady, it breathed in and out, like someone sleeping, someone waiting. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15. But then, as gradually as it started, it faded away. The sound grew softer and softer until I couldn't hear it anymore. Then the only sound was Lenny's breathing and the wind outside and the blood rushing through my ears. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, not even a wink. I lay there until dawn, watching the darkness slowly turn to sunup, waiting for that sound to come back. The next morning came slow, and it was overcast. And as I said, I hadn't slept at all. At the first light of morning, I crept slowly away from the bed and went downstairs to start the coffee. I stood at the kitchen window for a while, watching the sun try to burn through the clouds, thinking about what I'd heard in the dark. That breathing, the slow and patient noise coming from the corner of my son's room. I told myself it had to be nothing, just the house settling and the wind finding its way through a crack in the wall. Maybe after Lenny's strange nightmare, I was a little jumpy. I told myself all these things, and I nearly believed it. By the time the kids came down for breakfast, I'd managed to pull myself together. Carol was still sleeping. She'd slept through the whole ordeal, which I was grateful for. She needed her rest, and the last thing she needed was something else to worry about. Kenneth came down first, quiet as usual, and started to set the table without being asked. Then Lenny, looking pale and tired, but otherwise normal. He didn't mention what happened, and I didn't want to bring it up. Beverly came bouncing down last, chattering about something she'd dreamt about. A horse with wings, if I recall. Maybe a dog that could talk. I was having trouble listening. "I need to run into town today, guys," I said as we were finishing up. "Groceries, hardware store. Lenny, Beverly, you're coming with me. Kenneth, I need you to stay here and keep an eye on your mother." Kenneth nodded. He was a good kid, a responsible and dependable kid. I knew I could trust him. "What if she needs something?" he asked. "Just make sure she takes her pills at 10. There's water and crackers on the nightstand. And if anything happens, anything at all, call 911. You know where we'll be. Hardware store first, then Mel's Grocery." "Yes, sir," he said. We finished breakfast. I checked on Carol one more time, and then the three of us piled into the truck. As I was climbing into the driver's seat, I hesitated for a second. Then I went back to the barn, and I grabbed the coffee can with the bones in it. At that point in time, I wasn't sure exactly why I brought them yet. Part of it was practical. The sheriff's department had said someone would come out, but no one had yet, and I figured I might as well drop them off myself, save them the time. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite visualize yet. Those bones had been sitting on that shelf in my barn all night, and the thought of leaving them there while we were gone felt strangely wrong. Like we were leaving a door unlocked in a bad neighborhood. Like we were inviting in trouble. So I put the can on the floor of the passenger side, and we headed into town. The drive was nice and quiet. Lenny was staring out the window, not talking, while Beverly played with a doll she'd brought, making it walk across the dashboard. The clouds never did burn off. They just hung there low and heavy, making everything feel close and still. As I had told Kenneth, we hit the hardware store first. I needed to get a new blade for the brush cutter and some fence wire. And while I was there, I picked up a new hasp for the barn door, which had been giving me trouble. The whole trip took maybe 20 minutes. Then the grocery store. I let the kids pick out some ice cream. Those little cups with the wooden spoons. Then we got everything else on the list Carol had made for me. By the time we were loading the bags into the truck, it was almost noon. "One more stop, guys," I said. "You two wait here. Keep the truck running and keep the cold air on. Got it?" They nodded. I grabbed the coffee can and walked across the street to the sheriff's office. The county sheriff's department was housed in a squat brick building that looked like it hadn't been updated in nearly a century. There was a faded American flag hanging limp by the front door, and a couple of patrol cars parked out front, their engines ticking in the heat. Inside, a woman I didn't recognize was sitting behind the front desk, pecking away at a typewriter, which even then seemed a little outdated. She looked up when I came in. "Help you?" "Yes, ma'am. I called a couple days back about some bones I found on my property. I was told someone would come out and take a look, but nobody showed up. So I figured I'd just bring them in myself." She frowned, glancing down at something on her desk. Then she looked back up at me. "What was your name again?" I told her. She shuffled through some papers, made a little sound, then picked up the phone and spoke quietly to someone on the other end. After a minute, she hung up and gestured toward a row of plastic chairs along the wall. "Deputy Harrison will be with you in a few minutes." I sat down and waited. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough that I could hear it over the hum of the air conditioning. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, a door in the back opened, and a heavy-set man in a tan uniform came out. "Mr. Brosnan?" "And that's me. I'm Deputy Harrison. You're the one who found the bones?" "Yes, sir, out on my property, the northeast corner. I called it in a couple days ago." He nodded slowly, looking at the coffee can in my hands. "And you brought them here?" "Well, nobody ever came out to get them, so I figured this would be easier." He took the can from me, opened it, and peered inside. His expression didn't change. "These look old," he said. "That is what the lady on the phone said, but I thought you'd want them anyway for, I don't know, analysis or whatever." Deputy Harrison set the can down on the counter and rubbed the back of his neck. He had the look of a man who was fed up by something else, but here I was. "Here's the thing, Mr. Brosnan. Based on what I'm seeing here, these are almost certainly Native American remains. Pre-statehood, maybe older. And if that is the case, there's a whole process we have to go through. Federal laws, tribal consultation, archaeological assessment. It's not as simple as just handing them over." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "NAGPRA. Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. If these bones are what I think they are, we can't just take possession of them without knowing the proper procedures. We would need to get them examined, verified, dated. Then we'd have to contact the relevant tribes. Could be Comanche, could be Kiowa, could be half a dozen others depending on how old they are, and who controlled that territory at the time. It's a whole ordeal." "A whole ordeal," I repeated. "Deputy, I found human bones on my property. I just want to do the right thing here. And sir, I appreciate that, I do. But the right thing, legally speaking, is a lot more complicated than just dropping them off at the sheriff's office." I could feel my patience starting to fray. I'd been up all night. I was running on coffee and adrenaline. And now this man was telling me that doing the decent thing was going to require some kind of bureaucratic odyssey. "Fine," I said. "What if I just bury them back where I found them, put them back in the ground and say a prayer over them and call it done?" Deputy Harrison's expression shifted, became more stern. "I would not advise that, Mr. Brosnan. Now that you've removed the remains from where they were found, you've technically taken possession of them. Disposing of human remains improperly is a crime, and it doesn't matter how old they are. So you're telling me I can't give them to you and I can't put them back? Not without going through the proper channels. No." I stood there looking at this man. Then I glanced over to the coffee can on the counter, and I felt something hot and frustrated building in my chest. "This is insane," I said. "I understand your frustration, sir, I really do. But my hands are tied here. If you want, I can give you a number to call. There's a state office that handles these kinds of situations. They can walk you through the process. I don't have time for a process. I've got a farm to run, a sick wife at home, and 3 kids. Then I guess you've got a decision to make. I grabbed the can off the counter and walked out without another word. The kids looked up when I got back to the truck. Beverly, of course, had ice cream smeared around her mouth, and Linny was still working on his, scraping the last bits out of the bottom of the cup with his little wooden spoon. Leave it to Linny to take that long to eat a little cup of ice cream. You still have the bones? Beverly said. Yeah, sweetie, I still have the bones. Even the cops didn't want them, Linny said. There was something in his voice, something not quite his usual humor, but an attempt at it. He sounded like he was trying to act normal. It's just bureaucratic nonsense, I said, putting the truck into gear. Red tape. Nobody wants to do their job anymore. We pulled out onto the main road and headed home. The clouds had gotten thicker, and the air had that heavy, charged feeling. A storm was coming. I drove a little faster than I should have, still a bit irritated. You know, Linny said after a while, I heard a story once, back in school, a couple years ago, about this area, about what happened here before it was Oklahoma. What kind of story? Messed up stuff. Wars between the settlers and the Indians. He glanced at Beverly, who was looking out the window, not really paying attention. There was this homestead somewhere around here with a family of settlers. I think it was a man and his wife and their kids, kind of like us. One night a war party came through and, well, killed them. I didn't say anything, just kept watching the road. But that wasn't all, Linny continued. The family, the dead family, well, they had relatives somewhere. Brothers and cousins and something like that. And when they found out what happened, they came looking for revenge. They actually found the war party still at the homestead, still there after a few days. And they did things to them. Bad things. Kept them alive for a long time while they did it. Linny, I said. I'm just saying there's a lot of history out there. A lot of bad blood soaked into this dirt. I looked at him for a brief moment. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale just like this morning. His eyes looked tired. Son, times were different back then, I said. Horrible different. Everybody did terrible things to everybody else. Settlers to Indians and Indians to settlers, and everyone else caught in between. It was a brutal time, and a lot of innocent people suffered for it. I paused. But that's not how things have to be anymore. We're better now, or at least we're trying to be. Linny didn't respond. Beverly started to hum something to herself, and we drove the rest of the way in silence. We were maybe half a mile from the house when I saw Kenneth. He was running down the road towards us, waving his arms. And he was running hard, like something was after him. I felt my stomach sink. I slowed down, and he practically threw himself at the driver's side door, grabbing the handle. His face was white with fear. Dad, something's wrong. You have to come quick. Kenneth, slow down. What happened? It's Mom. There's something in the house with her. I heard these noises and I went to check on her. I was outside at the time, and when I went to the front door, it was locked. I didn't lock it, and it won't open. I couldn't get back in. I tried everything, and I heard someone walking around, and it wasn't Mom. Get in the truck. He jumped in the back with Linny and Beverly, and I floored it. The engine roared, tires kicking gravel, and we tore up the driveway faster than I'd ever driven on our property before. The house looked normal from the outside. Same white clapboard siding, same wraparound porch, and same everything. But there was something definitely wrong. It was too still, under a darkening sky. I grabbed the shotgun from behind the seat. Stay here, I told the kids. All of you, don't move until I come back. Kenneth is in charge. I ran to the front door and tried the handle. Locked. I fumbled for my keys. Then I found the right one and shoved it into the lock. It turned. I felt the bolt slide back. But when I pushed on the door, it didn't budge. Not an inch. It was like trying to push through a concrete wall. What the hell? I threw my shoulder against it then. Nothing. I kicked it as hard as I could, but nothing. Something was blocking it from the inside. Something heavy and immovable. I looked at the window next to the door. It was a single pane of old glass in a wooden frame. For the briefest of seconds, I thought about how much it would cost to replace. But then I thought about Carol, alone in there with God knows who, and I stopped thinking about the window. I flipped the shotgun around, gripping the barrel, and swung the stock as hard as I could. The glass exploded inward. I knocked out the remaining shards with my elbow, hoisting myself up, and climbed through. Inside the house, it was dark, way too dark. All the lights were off, and the clouds outside weren't letting much sun through the windows. I could hear something, a strange low sound that I couldn't quite recognize, though it did remind me of wind through a broken vent, or maybe breathing. I ran to our bedroom. The hallway seemed longer than ever. The shadows seemed thicker. My footsteps echoed off the walls in a way that didn't sound quite right, like the house had grown larger now, hollow and echoing. I rounded the corner into the bedroom and stopped. Carol was there. She was being held up off the bed, her feet dangling 6 inches above the mattress, her head lolled back. And the thing holding her, it was a man, or something shaped like a man. It was dressed in dark clothes, old clothes, fabric that hung in tatters from a frame that was too thin and too long. Its back was to me, one arm extended, hand wrapped around Carol's throat. "Hey!" The thing turned around, and I saw its face. Linny had tried to describe it, but the words couldn't capture what I was looking at. The face was bone, smooth, white bone, but it wasn't a skull. All the features had been ground away. No eye sockets, no nasal cavity, no mouth. Just a flat, inwardly curved surface, like someone had taken a human skull and sanded it down until there was nothing left but a featureless oval. And yet, somehow, I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing against my chest. For that terrible moment, we stared at each other. Then its body disappeared. I don't mean it faded or dissolved. I mean it was instantly gone in a flash. But the clothes, those tattered black rags, they stayed behind, hanging in the air for half a heartbeat, then suddenly shooting sideways, flying across the room toward the window. There, the glass was cracked, just a bit, just a thin line running from corner to corner. And the black fabric squeezed through that crack like smoke being sucked through a vent. Impossibly fast, impossibly fluid. At the same moment, the entire house went dark. And I don't mean the mostly already off lights. I mean all of the electricity. Refrigerator, the hallway clock, all of it dead silence now, dead darkness, except for the gray light filtering through the windows. Carol collapsed onto the bed. I was at her side in an instant, my hands on her face, her shoulders, checking her wounds, checking her breath, if there was breath. Carol? Carol, can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at me, looked through me almost, and for a second I wasn't sure she knew where she was. I was falling, she said. I dreamed I was falling, but there was no bottom. Just black. Black everywhere. And I could hear screaming. So much screaming. Honey, you're safe now, I said. You're safe. I'm here. But even as I said that, I wasn't sure if it was true. Whatever had been in this room, whatever had its hands around my wife's throat, it was still out there, on our land, and it wasn't finished with us. I didn't wait for an explanation. I didn't wait for anything. As soon as I knew Carol was breathing and okay, I grabbed the coffee can from where I'd left it on the kitchen counter, and I went outside. The clouds had broken by then, and the late afternoon sun was beating down on the fields with that fierce, merciless heat that only Oklahoma can produce. But I didn't feel it. I didn't feel anything except that white-hot rage burning in my chest, rage at the thing that had touched my wife, indignation for bringing those bones into our home, rage at the whole damn situation. I got in the truck, and I drove out to the northeast field, the acre I still hadn't finished clearing, the spot where I'd found those bones in the first place. I grabbed a shovel from the truck bed and started digging. The ground was hard, baked dry by the summer sun, but I didn't care. I dug like a man possessed, throwing dirt over my shoulder, not stopping until I had a hole about 2 feet deep. Then I upended the coffee can, letting the bones tumble into the earth, and I started to shovel the dirt back in. There, I shouted as I threw in the last shovelful. There! Is that what you want? Is that what this is about? My voice echoed across the empty field. Nothing answered. I stood there for a while, breathing hard. Sweat was dripping down my face by then. I was staring at the patch of disturbed earth before me. If this was some kind of angry spirit, some ghost or revenant, or whatever you want to call it, then maybe putting the bones back would appease it. Maybe it would finally leave us alone. But I wasn't sure. I just didn't know what else to do. I drove back to the house as the sun was setting, the kids still in the truck with me, though they were quiet. Carol was sitting up in bed when I got back. She looked confused, but otherwise unhurt. The kids clustered around her, all 3 of them. They were scared but relieved that Mom was okay. I told them everything was gonna be fine, that I took care of it, but I couldn't help but feel like I was lying. That night was another sleepless night. I didn't even try. I sat in the chair in our bedroom with the door open, shotgun in my lap, watching the dark hallway and listening to every creak and groan of the old house. Carol was asleep beside me. She had taken an extra dose of her pain medication and she drifted off almost immediately. The kids were in their rooms, doors closed, hopefully dreaming of something better than what we lived through that day. From where I sat, I could see down the hallway into the living room. The curtains were open and a little moonlight was filtering in, just enough to make out the shapes of the furniture. The couch, the side table, the old wooden rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother. I ended up just staring at that chair for some reason. It was empty, just an old piece of furniture sitting there in the dark. I blinked. When my eyes opened again, there was something in the chair. I felt my whole body go cold. It was just a shape, a dark, hunched shape. But it was facing me. I could feel its attention on me. The rocking chair was completely still. Whatever was sitting in it wasn't moving at all. I blinked again. There was a sound, a rapid skittering sound, like something moving very fast across a hard floor. And when my eyes opened, the chair was empty. But now there was something else. At the end of the hallway, maybe a yard from where I sat, a piece of black cloth was trailing across the floor. It led from the hallway into the bathroom, disappearing around the corner of the doorframe. I didn't understand what I was looking at. My brain couldn't process it. It was just a cloth, just fabric lying there on the floor like someone had dropped a piece of clothing. Then I looked up. At the very top of the bathroom doorway, 8 feet off the ground, pressed against the ceiling, there was a face looking down at me. Smooth, white, featureless. That flat, terrible expanse of bone, tilted at an angle that no human head should be able to achieve, staring down at me from the dark. I shouted something. I don't remember what, and I brought up the shotgun and fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed hallway. The muzzle flash lit up the entire house for one blinding instant, and in that flash I saw the face clearly, saw the texture of bone, and the way it seemed to drink in the light. Then it was gone. Just gone. The cloth on the floor, the figure in the doorway, all of it vanished like it had never been there. But the house erupted. Carol was screaming, the kids were screaming, doors were flying open. Kenneth came running down the hallway with a baseball bat. Lenny was right behind him. Beverly was crying somewhere in the dark. "Dad, Dad, what happened?" I couldn't answer. I was staring at the bathroom doorway still, at that empty space where the face had been, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Kenneth took the shotgun from my hands, and I didn't resist. "Dad, you've got to get some sleep," he said. He calmed himself down, then said, "You've been up for 2 days. You're starting to see things." "I'm not seeing things." Maybe not, but you're no good to any of us if you collapse." He looked at his brother. "Lenny, help me get him to bed. We'll take shifts and watch the house." I wanted to say I was fine, but I was actually proud. Kenneth was taking charge. And the truth was, he was right. I was running on fumes. My hands were weak, my vision was blurred, and every shadow in that hallway looked like it was moving. They let me back into the bedroom, set me down next to Carol, and took the shotgun. Kenneth stationed himself in the doorway while Lenny gathered up Beverly and brought her into the room with us. We all stayed together that night. Carol and Beverly in the bed, me in the chair and Lenny on the floor with Kenneth standing guard. I'm not sure when I fell asleep. I remember dreading the idea of seeing the damage I'd done with my shotgun in our own home the next morning. I remember closing my eyes and then I opened them, and morning light was streaming through the windows. Nothing had happened. The rest of the night had passed without incident. But I knew it wasn't over. That day I made some calls after patching up the hole in my ceiling, grateful that I hadn't punctured any plumbing. I wasn't sure who to contact, knowing the police would be useless. So I started with the library in town, then the historical society, anyone else I could think of who might know something about the history of our land. By mid-morning, I'd been put in touch with a woman named Dr. Sarah Whitehorse, a historian at the University of Oklahoma, who specialized in Native American history and early settler conflicts in the territory. She agreed to come out that afternoon. She was a small woman, maybe 50, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She walked the property with me, asking me questions about what I'd found and where I'd found it, then listened carefully as I described everything that had happened since. When I finished, I expected her to call me crazy or to roll her eyes. She said, "The story your son told you in the truck, the one about the Homestead Massacre. Do you remember more details?" "Some of them. A settler family was killed by a war party who overstayed their welcome. Then relatives came back and took revenge." Dr. Whitehorse nodded slowly. "That story is more than just a story. It happened. And it happened here, on this exact piece of land." My heart skipped a beat. "The Harmon family," she continued. "They established a homestead here in 1872. Father, mother, 3 children, exactly like your family. In the spring of 1873, a Comanche raiding party came through. The family was killed, all of them. And the revenge? Somehow someone saw what happened, and the Harmon's relatives caught wind. They had family in Kansas, brothers and cousins. When they heard what happened, they came down with about a dozen men. The raiding party was still in the area. They'd been using the homestead as a temporary camp, which is actually unlike them. The Harmons ambushed them." She paused. "What they did to those men, it's not something I like to talk about, but they kept them alive for days, tortured them in ways I won't describe. When they were finally done, they burned the bodies, burned them completely down to cinders. They wanted to make sure there was nothing left, nothing that could be buried, nothing that could be honored." "But what about the bones I found?" "They aren't Native American. They can't be. The Comanche remains were destroyed completely." Dr. Whitehorse looked at me with something like sympathy in her eyes. "The bones you found belong to the Harmon family, these settlers who were killed here." "But why would they—" I stopped. I didn't know how to finish the question. "The manner of their deaths," Dr. Whitehorse explained. "It was brutal, even by the standards of that time. The raiding party, they dragged some of the family members behind horses, face down, across the prairie." I stared at her. "You understand what that means," she continued. "The ground here is very hard, rocky in places. Being dragged face down across it at speed for hours at a time." She trailed off. "Some of the bodies were never recovered because there wasn't enough left to recover. The flesh and bone had been worn away, sanded down to nothing." That smooth, featureless face appeared in my mind. The flat expanse of bone where features should have been. "What can I do?" I asked. "The Harmon family was buried at a cemetery about 2 hours north of here. The ones they could find, anyway, and future members. It's a small place, mostly forgotten now, but it still exists. If my hunch is correct and those bones belong to one of the family members who was never recovered," she hesitated, "they should be with their family. They've been alone out here for over 100 years. Can you find out where exactly the cemetery is?" "I can make some calls. I should have some information for you by noon tomorrow." Good, I thought. One more night. I just had to get through one more night. That evening, I gathered the family together and told them what I'd learned. Carol was out of bed by then, still weak but insisting on being a part of what came next. The kids listened with wide eyes as I explained about the Harmon family, about what happened on this land, and about why I needed to dig up those bones one more time. "Tomorrow," I said, First thing in the morning, we dig up those bones. Then we take a little trip and put them where they belong. I stayed up again that night. I knew I should sleep, God knows I needed it, but I couldn't. Not with what I knew now, not with that thing still anywhere. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 o'clock, 2. I walked the hallway, checking on the boys, then circling back to check on Beverly. Her door was open. I'd left it that way on purpose, so I could see her from the hall. But in that moment, when I looked in, something was wrong. The window above her bed was open. The curtains were blowing in the night breeze, and Beverly was being pulled through the window. She was upside down, her hair hanging toward the floor, and her small body was halfway out into the darkness. Something had her by the ankles and was dragging her through, and she was wide awake. Her eyes were open, her mouth was open, but she wasn't screaming. She was too scared to make a sound. Her eyes locked onto mine, pleading for help. And then, with one yank, she disappeared. I crossed that room in a second, and I jumped through the window. I was outside in the dark, my bare feet hitting the hard ground, and my eyes straining to see anything in the moonless night. I could hear something ahead of me, a dragging sound, something being pulled across the dirt. I ran as fast as my heart would let me. It was overwhelmingly dark that night. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, but I could hear her. I could hear that dragging sound, and I followed it. Moments later, I could no longer hear it. I stopped, gasping for air, turning in circles, trying to figure out where I was. The field. I was in the northeast field, the acre I still needed to clear. There was a scream. I sprinted toward the sound, and I found her. Beverly was lying face down in the dirt. She'd been flipped over at some point during the drag, and her face and arms were pressed into the hard ground. She was scraped up, cuts on her cheeks, on her hands, on her knees, blood mixed with dirt. I fell to my knees beside her and picked her up. "I'm so sorry," I said. The words came out broken and choked. I was crying too. I hadn't even realized it until then. I'd been crying for some time. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have protected you. I should have..." She buried her face in my chest and sobbed. I carried her back to the house. I don't know how long it took, but it felt like hours. When we got there, Carol was standing on the porch, her face terrified and worried, and the boys were behind her. We all went to the master bedroom, all 5 of us. We stayed there together, huddled on the bed, waiting for dawn. Beverly was okay. Scuffed up, dirty, but okay. When the sun finally came up, we went out to the field as a family. I dug up the bones while the kids watched. It only took a few minutes. I hadn't buried them very deep. I put them back in the coffee can, put the can in the truck, and we all piled in together. We drove into town. We got hamburgers and more ice cream. We sat in a booth at the diner and pretended everything was fine. We were just a regular family having a regular day. The kids even laughed. And that made all the difference. At noon, I found a payphone, and I called Dr. Whitehorse. "Oh, hi. I tried to reach you this morning, but you didn't seem to be home." "No, sorry about that. We weren't home. Do you have the information?" She gave me the exact name and location of the cemetery. It was about 2 hours north, just like she'd said. A small family plot, mostly abandoned now, but still maintained by the county. She said, "You should contact the caretakers, or see if any of the Harmon descendants still live there. There's a proper way to do this." Again, with the proper way. told her. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate your help. Then I hung up and went back to the truck. We drove north for almost 2 hours. The cemetery was exactly where she said it would be. A small fenced-in plot on a hill overlooking a creek. There were maybe 20 headstones, most of them weathered and worn out, the names barely legible anymore. I found the Harmon section near the back. Father, mother, 2 of the 3 children. There was an empty space next to them, overgrown with grass. I did not contact the caretakers. I did not look for descendants. I found a spot where the ground was soft, dug a hole with my hands, and put the bones inside. Rest now, I said quietly. You're home. We drove back in silence. By the time we got to the farm, the sun was setting and the sky was orange and red. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was quiet. No breathing in corners, no figures in the dark, no smooth, featureless faces staring down from doorways. It was over. Life went on. Carol eventually got better. Not cured, but better. The kids grew up, went to college, and they got families of their own. Kenneth's a lawyer now, and I couldn't be more proud. Lenny teaches high school history, which I find very fitting. Beverly's a nurse, and she's got 2 kids. We never talked much about that summer after it happened. It was too painful and too strange. But I still think about it. Usually late at night, when the house is quiet, I think about that poor soul who spent over a century alone in the dirt, lost and forgotten, their face ground away to nothing by the cruelty of men. I think about what they must have suffered, and I think about how all they wanted was to go home to their family. I'm grateful. That's the word I keep coming back to, grateful. Because that summer, I faced something I could not explain that could have destroyed my whole family, and against all odds, it was a problem that I could actually solve. Not every problem is like that. Not every darkness can be driven away by doing the right thing. But this one could, and I thank God for that every single day. I want to end this episode by wishing all of you a very Merry Christmas. This is a pretty good story for the holidays in a way. Wholesome, happy ending, and scary enough to get you through the family get-togethers. It's easily one of my recent favorites. This has been Tales from the Break Room, a podcast where I read scary work-related stories, and you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. I'll be back soon, maybe with one more story before the new year. Till then, I'll be clocking out, so take care.